all these big companies, Sony, TDK, they control a significant part of the market. How do we win that market from them? They decided to do this by discrediting Sony. So what they did was, at that point of time, Sony was the only company that had blank, cassettes in the market. They bought a lot of the blank cassettes, replaced the good tape, the high quality Japanese tape, with inferior tape into it and put it back into the market. And said, see, these are all pirated goods, you can't rely on them. Instead, why don't you buy T-Series' original blank cassettes, which are anyway much cheaper? So a combination of straightforward illegality, innovative legality, but what is interesting is the effect of this. The market share of HMV falls from 92% to 40%. There is a corresponding fall in the absolute domination of the Hindi film song as the only aesthetic, with the rise of a range of forms. So there's a form called Rasya, Birha, Kavali, the devotional song, the vulgar Bhojpuri wedding song, a whole range of forms that suddenly emerge, right? So if you're looking at the idea of cultural diversity, not just in terms of how many kind of players, but the variety of forms, cassette culture in a way brings about a massive transformation in the very idea of the possibilities of cultural practice.
とにかく、それまでレコード音楽産業ってレコード中心になった時に、カセット産業が入ってくるんだけど、カセット産業を始めた人は電気屋さんで、日本とか韓国に行ってカセットテープをどうやって作るかっていうのを勉強して、インドでその会社を立ち上げる。でいろんなカセットでそれで音楽を要求する、最初は例えば海賊版、HMV が出してる海賊版を出したりするんだけども、と同時に、なんか2年経ったやつ、ヒットソング2年ぐらい経ったやつにそのオリジナルのソングじゃない人に歌わせて別バージョン出していくみたいな事業を始めて、それを成功させていくと。であるいはなんか他のいろんなジャンルも成功させていくと同時に、それまではレコードショップと言われてたレコードをもっとダッツ中心化して、いろんなコーナーショップというか、日本でいうコンビニみたいな小さなタバコとかということでバーッと売り出して、売り上げを飛ばしていくと。でなんかカセット本当にちょっとちゃんと分かるどういうことなのかなんですけど、要するにソニーのカセットをたくさん購入して、そこに入ってるテープを質の悪いやつに変えてもう一回マーケットに出したんだよね。そうするとなんか空のテープを買って録音するよりもこのテープを買った方が安くていいやっていうことになって、そのソニーの戦略を潰していくみたいなこともやったんですよ多分。
いやなんかソニーと TCB が結びついてるんですよね。だからソニーがなんか要はブランクカセットっていうまだ何も音楽が録音されてないやつでいい品質のものを持っていて、でなんかそれがTCB がもうすでにかなり人気だったから、なんかそこがなんかこう何も入ってないやつを売って、でそれに音楽を入れてで売ることで、なんかこれまではインドのなんか映画の音楽だけが主に消費されてるみたいなところから、なんかいろんな種類とかあらゆるジャズでも何でもいろんな種類の音楽っていうのがそのカセットに乗って広まったみたいな。でなんか多分 HMV とかっていうのはすごい大きいところの街とかにしか行かないとなかったんですけど、なんか結構本当にコーナーのさっき言ったような小さいショップがなんかいわゆる移民とかたくさん貧乏な人も住んでるところにあって、そこで売るからめちゃめちゃTCB みたいな儲かったんです。
で 90% あったのは 40% まで落ちて、売り上げシェアが落ちて、もともとレコード会社、その代わりその音楽のバラエティーがものすごく広がった。ちょっとさっきのちょっと後で確認しましょう。
So this story, in a way, of creativity and infrastructure are indistinguishable. Creativity and infrastructure actually are entirely enmeshed together. And the reason that we use the phrase pirate modern or recycled modern is because electronic modernity of this nature becomes a new way of moving back into or occupying the space of modernity which is not available for you in terms of the monumental ideas of modernity. It's a very tactile, a very mobile, and a very local idea of what it means to be modern. So if Hollywood produces a certain idea of the present, if Bollywood reproduces and produces its own idea of the present, the availability of these two forms in very cheap kind of electronic modes allows for an entry point into the occupation of this domain. And there's an ad that I'd like to play you, which in a way captures this idea of the recycling rather well. So there's the important part of the iconography in this is the original car that he was tinkering with is a car called the Ambassador. For the longest time there were only two cars in India. There was the Ambassador and there was the Fiat. The Ambassador remains till today the sign in a way of a certain kind of a national modernity because it was the bureaucratic car. So the white Ambassador or the black and yellow Ambassador taxi was in a way symbolic of a certain kind of a period of national development. So this kind of the transition from the Ambassador to the Peugeot, which you cannot afford, and hence you have to tinker the Ambassador, is really in a way metaphorical of the idea for me of how do you tinker with the idea of modernity to make it, or to make it kind of inhabitable in the domain of the everyday.
今も見た通りなんですけど、要するにもともとインドって2つしか種類ない。いやそのアンバサダー、なんか国産の会社しかないので、国産のやつはビューロクラティックなある種イメージだったのを、こういうふうに不条に変えた作り変えるっていうことです。
And for me, the emergence of media markets in the 80s onwards is really what enables much of this story. So if the T-series story in music extends, and I won't spend too much time on it, we can have a discussion about it, in the domain of computers, in the domain of VCDs, in the domain of DVDs. VCDs in particular is a very crucial technology because VCD was seen to be a distinctly Asian technology. So Shuzhen Wong in her history of VCD production says that VCDs were being produced almost simultaneously at the same time as DVDs emerged, right? So there were Sony and Philips who were the key players in this entire race. But Hollywood decided that they will not use VCDs in the US. They will go directly from VHS to DVDs. And instead they will release VCDs into the lower markets, which are the Asian markets. And the reason for the development of VCDs and DVDs was to fight piracy. Because tape was so easily reproducible, the digital could not be copied. You couldn't copy a CD in the way that you could copy a DVD. I mean, it's kind of almost touching to think about the naivety that went into that particular assumption because we all know exactly what happened. VCDs and DVDs in a way kind of reproduced in a massive way. But when VCDs were introduced into China, it's really the transformation of an entire, kind of political as well as cultural economy. Because all of a sudden China becomes a central, crucial point through which all kinds of circulation and leaks are taking place. So a lot of the DVD and the VCD production that happens in China soon finds its way into the Indian markets. And there's an interesting kind of emergence of a new kind of a language. In India, for example, when you go into one of the pirate markets and you want to buy a DVD player, they will ask you, do you want a local one or do you want a company one? When they refer to a local one, what they mean is a made in China cheap product. But so the idea of locality gets transformed. So the local is the Chinese good and the company one is actually the one that's made in India but is a branded product, right? So the global suddenly has been displaced from the nation state and the China, which is not a part of the national imagination, has suddenly been completely brought into the language of the local. So this is a complete shift that happens.
ちょっと日本では分かりにくい話なんですけど、コンピューターにおけるこういうパイレートの話、80年代以降どう起こったかって話をしたいんですけども、特に面白いのは VCD っていうフォーマットがあるんですよ。アジアのフォーマットで。DVD っていうフォーマットがあって、日本では VCD はほとんど分かんなかったので、フォーマットとしてはほとんど DVD と同じなんだけど、クオリティが低い。 やつですね。でアメリカは直接 DVD に移行したとか VCD を採用したかったので、VCD を採用したのは割とアジアのその地国で、とりわけ中国がすごく作ったので、VCD はとにかくもうバンバンそのコピーパイラシーできるから、それが普及してくるんだけども、でそれがその中国で作られたその海賊版が VCD 海賊版がインドに入ってくるっていう状況が起きている。で同時に、面白いのはっていうのを言い換えてたら、こういうなんかショップに行くとローカルのものを欲しいですか、会社のやつを欲しいですかって聞くと、ローカルの欲しいっていうと、なんかその VCD、その中国製の VCD を買うことができて、会社の正規版が欲しいっていうと、インドでそのなんていうかちゃんと権利を取ったやつなんだけど、その要するにローカルの方が安い。その中国製のやつが売って、そこはすごく面白くて、そのローカルっていう概念がちょっとそこで変わってしまって、中国製の安いものがローカルっていう概念になり、カンパニーっていうのはなんかインドで作られたものになってるっていうのが感じですよ。
A lot of these pirate markets, pirate electronic markets, I'll show you some pictures later, have very interesting names. They're called Singapore Bazaar, Tokyo Plaza, Beijing Bazaar, Burma Bazaar. So in a way they are a reference to an East Asia or an East Asian modernity. So the national modern always referenced in a way European or Anglo-Saxon modernity. This is a new kind of a reference. It's a reference in a way to the electronic boom that happened in East Asia, right? One of the big markets in Delhi is a market called Palika Bazaar. It's an underground air-conditioned market. The background to this market is a very interesting one. It was set up in the 70s, and it was basically in the heart of the city as a part of the then Prime Minister's very ambitious son, a person called Sanjay Gandhi, extremely violent kind of a background in terms of what he did in the 70s. But he displaced thousands of people who were living in a squatter settlement, removed them to create this market. And the idea behind the market was to create a non-space. Delhi was, it's a hot place in summer, it's uncomfortable, it's basically, life is a mess in Delhi in the summer, right? So he said, the problem with why we're not able to attract tourists is because, it's so uncomfortable. So I want to create in the heart of the city. This is literally the epicenter of Delhi in terms of, as the map goes. I want to create a fully air-conditioned underground market that will transport people out of India into somewhere else. So the master plan of this market is a remarkable document because it is almost science fiction. It talks about how you enter. On your left-hand side, there will be a flower seller, then there will be a juice shop, etc., etc. It's a very large underground market. The entire market is now a pirate market, right? So this is one of the crucial stories in a way of the recycle modern is the transformation of this national imagination and the global imagination and its recycling into everyday life. So you can see Uncle Sam targets pirates of Palika Bazaar, right? So this is a cause of intense conflict. And there is a case which is ongoing in the Delhi High Court, and it's a remarkable document. I know you can't read it, but I can try and just... There are 8 petitioners. Who are the 8 petitioners? Time Warner Entertainment, 4000 Warner Boulevard, Burbank, California. Columbia Pictures, Disney, Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, Paramount, TriStar, 20th Century Fox, Universal City Studios. In other words, Hollywood and the 8 majors constituting something like 1.3 or 1.4 trillion dollars of net worth versus Arun Kumar Gupta, proprietor, Lamhe Music Shop, B43, Greater Kailash, New Delhi, 11048, constituting approximately 300,000 yen a year turnover. Paragraph 28 of the petition says, even a single sale or rental of the film is capable of causing irreparable injury and damage. The film can be a plate from which several thousands of other pirate prints can be prepared, and if it reaches the hands of a cable network, a single telecast is capable of reaching several million homes all over India. The potential for damage is immeasurable and irreparable. So this is a remarkable contest. So you have on the one hand the biggest kind of film industry in the world suddenly finding this little shop, posing an irreparable, kind of damage or causing irreparable damage to them. There's also the language of this is really remarkable because there's a transformation. It says a single print is capable of reaching several million homes in India, and that will be a disaster. The imagination of television the development impulse in a way of national modernity in the adoption of communication technologies was in fact to reach several million homes. So you also have a kind of a radical re-understanding of the idea of the relationship between public interests, public communication, and the public sphere, completely altered now. So what you have as an example of this document is really the sharp battle lines where piracy has become a feature in a way of the contemporary, where you turn into a page 3 of a newspaper, along with stories of murder, sexual assault, you will have stories of raids or of kind of kind of raids on pirates. So.
なんていうかな、ちょっと最初言ったのは、昔の昔の、年初モダンの時はヨーロッパが参照点で、グローバルモダンの時はアジアっていうのは参照点で、東京なんとかというふうな図がたくさんあるんだけど、その中でも面白いものの一つに、ゼリーの中にある一番大きなその、なんていうかな、地下にあるすごい、クーラーの効いた大きなその海賊版がすごいたくさん売ってるマーケットがあって、でもともとはそれはなんか移民たちがスポッティングしていた場所だったんだけども、それをこう追い出して、別のなんかものを作ろうというふうに政府が考えて、作り始めた。で特にデリーはすごい暑かったからクーラーをガンガン効かせて、観光客を呼び込むようにやっていこうと思ったら、でも出来上がったものはそれが全部なんかその海賊版を売ってる店になってしまったっていうのがすごく面白い。でそこはそのインドの中でものすごく人気のあるところだったんだけど、同時にそういう海賊版のショップっていうのがアメリカのそういうメジャー、今言ったそのコロンビアとかコロンビアとかからもターゲットにされてきて、実際裁判が起きている。でもそこで訴えられているものっていうのは本当に小さなその海賊版の店にしか過ぎないんだけれども、でも彼らがその海賊版を作ることによっていきなりその数百万ものオーディエンスにワーッとテレビを通じて伝わるようなことが起きていて、でしかもなんか言ってしまえばハリウッド全体がその小さなショップと戦っていて、しかもそのパイラシーの行為によってそうした関係性が一気に変わってしまうようなことが起きている。で、そういうなんか事態っていうのがグローバルなので。
These are some of the images from the media markets. But you can see, so it says TV, VCD, plumbing, interior decoration, catering. These are worlds that just completely seamlessly move into each other. And if you remember the first frame of the comic and the blankness, this is the last frame of the comic. It's a free-to-download comic. It's available online. You can see that the density of the market, the Indian market that we know, is now layered, where urban infrastructure and media infrastructure become indistinguishable. And this is the creation of a new kind of space. And that's the space that we've been interested in exploring. And you can see that there's the new Hong Kong Bazaar, Burma Bazaar, Bangkok Plaza, and of course, now with China's emergence as the dominant economic new superpower, there's a new China Bazaar that is shortly opening, right? This also provides for me a very different map of Asia. It provides in a way a certain map of Asia which, on the one hand, you can see that the Motion Picture Association also has a different map of Asia. Film release in the US, 3 DVDs available in Malaysia on 22nd May, moves to Singapore, moves to Hong Kong, Taiwan, Macau, moves to Thailand, moves to China, right? So this is a completely different kind of a map of Asia. I'm interested in this particular map to understand how one can link, on the one hand, a much older history of informal cultural flows, whether it is via Buddhism or whether it is via, in a way, a certain kind of the itinerary, itinerants in terms of travelers, etc., to the contemporary idea of the informal flows. Because if Hollywood dominates the world film industry in terms of production and distribution, I don't know whether Hollywood is bigger than the Japanese film industry in Japan. In most countries in the world, Hollywood is bigger than the national film industry.
It's tricky. Now I think Japanese film industry is usually bigger.
Right.
But this is recently.
Right. Because, I think as far as I knew, around a couple of years ago, it must have been like 7 or 8 countries in the world where the national film industry is bigger than Hollywood. In every other country, Hollywood is bigger than the national film industry. So what you have emerging also, just like with the audio cassette revolution, there was a change of aesthetics. There is a new kind of an informal aesthetics that is emerging. So Japanese films that do not have any release in theaters in India are very popular in the underground circuit in terms of the pirate market. So one of my pirate informants, who's actually a remarkable story in himself, I don't have the time to do the entire story, of how he became a cineast and became a cinephile by accidentally discovering world cinema. Because a lot of people who go to the pirate market go looking for pornography. And they would go to him and look for pornography. And he noticed that sometimes some of the people would get really excited by looking at certain kinds of pornography. And what were they getting excited by? This was in the realm of the senses. What is the name of the filmmaker? Nagase Oshima's Oshima's in the realm of the senses. And the person who got very excited was actually a award-winning filmmaker from India. So he suddenly said, do you have more films like this? So this kind of, pirate suddenly started classifying a new genre called story pornography, right? Which is porn films which seem to have a story that people get excited about. And that basically is the unofficial history of world cinema. So from, Antonioni to, Oshima to, what is the other, Last Tango, Bertolucci, all of them started emerging. And he really became, in a way, the archivist of contemporary, art house. And his favorite filmmaker is Beat Kitano. He says, I don't like all this Godard, Truffaut. I really like Kitano. So there's this kind of a really remarkable story of kind of cultural practices which have, been enabled by, the informal circulation of films. And I want to end with an account of a local film industry. Can we have the lights off for some of this? This is a film industry in a small town called Malegaon. And this is from a documentary made by a filmmaker called Faiza Khan. The film is called, this should be enough, The Supermen of Malegaon. What is remarkable about this film industry is that for a long time they were making films for less than $1,000. And most of the films are remakes of Bollywood films. But having made a number of Bollywood films, they've said, we've arrived really far. Now it's time to take on the global industry. And they decide to remake Superman. Right? So I'm going to show you 3 clips. The first one is setting the context of the place.
मालेगांव में एंटरटेनमेंट तो अभी फिलहाल कुछ नहीं है। यहाँ पर ज़्यादातर वीडियो थिएटर ही है और वीडियो पार्लर है। ये जो प्रिंस शोरूम आप देख रहे हैं, यहाँ पर पहले वीडियो पार्लर था। यहाँ पर मैं अलग अलग टाइप की फिल्में लगाता था, कॉमेडी, एक्शन, हॉरर, जैकी चैन की, जेटली की। तो देख देख के शौक हुआ कि यार मुझको ही फिल्म बनाना चाहिए। तो फिर मैंने कैमरा लिया, शादी उदी की ऑर्डर करने लगा।